This video is about my channel and what I was trying to do with it, and what I'm still trying to do with it. So I made a lot of videos, as you can see, of me as different female characters. Maybe I should say women characters, to be more precise. And I did that for a number of reasons. For one thing, I identified as trans for a period of my life. As I recall, it was a couple of years. And so I felt comfortable expressing myself as a woman and presenting myself as a woman. I felt as comfortable doing that as I did as a man. Sometimes even more comfortable as a woman. It felt more natural. I grew up with 3 strong role models who were women: my mother, my aunt, and my sister. And I wasn't strongly attracted to my father as a role model. I didn't feel a strong affinity with him, or my uncle, which was my aunt's husband. He was a lovely man, and he certainly gave me a fuller notion of what it meant to be a man than my father, who was often hyper-masculine. My father was actually a very sensitive man, but he was very careful about who he showed that side of himself to. He could be guarded, reticent, but he was also warm and sentimental. So over the years, especially recently, I've started to really appreciate my father and the nature and the depth of his love for his family. There was my mother, my sister, and me. He was a real family man, and he saw himself that way. So as I've gotten older, I've had role models who are men, and that's part of why I identify as a man. I identify as a gender-fluid man, and I'll try and explain that perhaps in this video or in upcoming videos. For me, it doesn't seem quite enough to say I'm a man, because so much of my adult and my teenage gender identity had to do with presenting feminine. And I also would like men to have much more space than they do now for emotional expression of feelings that we often feminize. So, for example, it's unusual to see men in movies or TV shows who say things like, "I'm really scared. I don't know what to do right now." That kind of vulnerability is what we need from men. We need to see that it actually enhances their humanity, and it doesn't diminish their masculinity when they're vulnerable. Men carry a lot of shame, and I think one of the ways they deflect that shame or try to overcome it is to put on a brave front and show aggression, show power. But men feel a lot of fear and uncertainty and sadness. I recently saw that many alcoholic men are actually depressed. So I do identify as a man, but I also identify as gender fluid because as I say, I've expressed feminine for so much of my teenage and adult years, emotionally as well as in physical presentation. So my full identification is as a gender fluid man, and that may shift in the future. I may just identify as a man, or I may just identify as gender fluid. But for now, I primarily use he, him, his pronouns, except when I present as a woman. But I do that rarely. I haven't done it for a long time. So, and I don't feel comfortable with they, exclusively they, them, their. I do feel embodied into male existence, and I've been shaped to be a boy, and then have grown into manhood. So this channel is largely about what's been called the male gaze, also a heteronormative male gaze. That is, it's the way that men look at women, heterosexual men look at women. And I'm trying to understand and interrogate notions of objectification and sexualization, fetishization. So, I think for me, one of the reasons that I performed feminine, and I get this notion of gender performance from Judith Butler, a feminist theorist. One of the reasons that I performed femme for so many years, I believe, was that it gave me more power sexually than I had as a man. I didn't feel I was very attractive as a man to women, but when I presented as a woman, I could really feel the male gaze upon me, walking on the streets, being in nightclubs, and so that power was quite dizzying, very exciting. It was a rush, and so it became a kind of addiction where I regularly presented femme. And after a while, I went out on Halloween one year, I believe it was 2008, and a friend of mine, I had asked to take pictures of me. I was en femme, and then he said, "Why don't you film some videos and put them on YouTube?" And so I gave a live show of the Vane Sisters the following Halloween, 2009, and in March of 2010 I started to put videos on YouTube, and to my surprise they were extremely successful, and I had 1 million views within the first year of that channel. It was called the Vane Sisters. I also went on Facebook and Twitter and created accounts. So what I was trying to do was to present what could be called a third way that is beyond the binary. I'm reading a book called Vested Interests right now by Marjorie Garber, and the subtitle is Cross-Dressing and Cultural Anxiety. She talks about the movie Tootsie and the figure of what was then called the cross-dresser, and how it represents a third way beyond the binarism of man-woman. That this third way can be seen as a synthesis, and in a previous video I talked about the Tao, that those circling teardrop-shaped yin and yang. But perhaps a better analogy for gender is not that, which is ultimately binary, right? It's white and black in the Tao. But perhaps a better analogy is the spectrum, the rainbow, where each person has a unique gender identity, like a fingerprint or a snowflake. So there are literally 8 billion different gender identities, the way that we enact gender, perform gender. And I'm hoping that there will be more people who I identify as gender fluid men in the future, because I think it's necessary in a time of toxic masculinity to perform masculinity in a healthy way, and to move freely between both poles of the spectrum, through all the range of emotions in between: anger, sadness, joy, peace, loving kindness. So to get back to the channel, I was interested in how the male gaze can often be obsessive, compulsive, and it can involve a desire to possess the woman, control the woman, and so my characters are sometimes in that role. I tried to make them as strong as I could, strong women, and I often used waspy names for them, like Sarah Anderson. Even though I don't identify as white, I identify as brown. My background is Indo-European on both sides. But I often represented on the channel blonde, blue-eyed women, because I wanted to critique this idea that the blonde, blue-eyed white woman is somehow at the apex of the culture. That's what everyone either wants to be if you're a woman, or wants to have if you're a man. I wanted to critique that, and the beauty industry, the cosmetics industry, that promote a certain idea that a woman has to amplify herself through makeup, through heels, through tight-fitting clothes, show off her curves, in order for men to be interested in them. So I'm trying to critique objectification and sexualization. I'm trying to challenge the status quo. It might seem as if I'm participating in the status quo, but I'm always trying to unsettle that. And I'm hoping that by giving context, by speaking about the channel, it will help to understand my intentions and the frame that I bring to the channel. Alright, thanks for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.